Good morning. Today's Bible reading comes from Matthew 27, Luke 23, and Mark 15. So let's get into it. In the first light of dawn, all the high priests and religious leaders met and put the finishing touches on their plot to kill Jesus. Then they tied him up and paraded him to Pilate, the governor. Judas, the one who betrayed him, realized that Jesus was doomed. Overcome with remorse, he gave back the 30 silver coins to the high priest, saying, "I've sinned. I've betrayed an innocent man." They said, "What do we care? That's your problem." Jesus threw the silver coins into the temple and left. Then he went out and hung himself. The high priest picked up the silver pieces, but then didn't know what to do with them. Wouldn't be right to give this, a payment for murder, as an offering in the temple. They decided to get rid of it by buying the potter's field and use it as a burial place for the homeless. That's how the field got called Murder Meadow, a name that is stuck to this day. Then Jeremiah's words became history. They took the 30 silver pieces, the price of the one priced by some sons of Israel, and they purchased the potter's field. And so they unwittingly followed the divine instructions to the letter. Jesus was placed before the governor, who questioned him, "Are you the King of Jews?" Jesus said, "If you say so." But when the accusations rained down hot and heavy from the high priest and religious leaders, he said nothing. Pilate asked him, "Do you hear that long list of accusations? Aren't you going to say something?" Jesus kept silence, not a word from his mouth. The governor was impressed, really impressed. It was an old custom during the feast for the governor to pardon a single prisoner named by the crowd. At the time, that had the infamous Jesus Barabbas in prison. With the crowd before him, Pilate said, "Which prisoner do you want me to pardon? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus, the so-called Christ?" He knew it was through sheer spite that they had turned Jesus over to him. While court was still in session, Pilate's wife sent him a message. "Don't get mixed up in judging this noble man. I've just been through a long and troubled night because of a dream about him." Meanwhile, the high priest and religious leaders had talked the crowd into asking for the pardon of Barabbas and the execution of Jesus. The governor asked, "Which of the two do you want me to pardon?" They said, "Barabbas." "Then what do I do with Jesus, the so-called Christ?" They all shouted, "Nail him to the cross." He objected, but for what crime? But they all yelled all the louder, "Nail him to a cross." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere and that a riot was imminent, he took a basin of water, washed his hands in full sight of the crowd, saying, "I'm washing my hands of responsibility for this man's death. From now on, it's on your hands, your judge and jury." The crowd answered, "We'll take the blame, we and our children after us." Then he pardoned Barabbas, but he had Jesus whipped and then handed over for crucifixion. The soldiers assigned to the governor took Jesus into the governor's palace and got the entire brigade together for some fun. They stripped him and dressed him in a red toga. They plaited a crown from branches of thorn bush and set it on his head. They put a stick in his right hand for a scepter, but they knelt before him in mocking reverence. "Bravo, King of the Jews," they said. "Bravo." Then they spit on him and hit him on the head with the stick. When they had had their fun, they took off the toga and put his own clothes back on him. Then they proceeded out to the crucifixion. Along the way, they came on a man from Cyrene called Simon and made him carry Jesus' cross. Arriving at Golgotha, the place they called Skull Hill, they offered him a mild painkiller, mixture of wine and myrrh, but when he tasted it, he wouldn't drink it. After they had finished nailing him to the cross and were waiting for him to die, they whiled away the time by throwing dice for his clothes. Above his head they had posted the criminal charge against him. This is Jesus, King of the Jews. Along with him they also crucified two criminals, one to his right and the other to his left. People passing by along the road jeered, shaking their heads in mock lament. You bragged that you could tear down the temple and then rebuild it in 3 days. So show us your stuff. Save yourself. If you're really God's son, come down from that cross. The high priest, along with the religion scholars and leaders, were right there mixing it up with the rest of them, having a great time poking fun at him. He saved others, he can't save himself. King of Israel, is he? Then let him get down from that cross. We'll all become believers then. He was so sure of God. Well, let him rescue his son now, if he wants him. He did claim to be God's son, didn't he? Even the two criminals crucified next to him joined in the mockery. From noon to 3 the whole earth was dark. Around mid-afternoon Jesus groaned out of the depths, crying loudly, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you abandoned me? Some bystanders who heard him said, he's calling for Elijah. One of them ran and got a sponge soaked in sour wine and lifted it on a stick so he could drink. The others joked, don't be in such a hurry. Let's see if Elijah comes and saves him. But Jesus again cried out loudly, breathed his last. At that moment, the temple curtain was ripped in two, top to bottom. There was an earthquake and rocks were split in pieces. What's more, tombs were opened up, and many bodies of believers asleep in their graves were raised. After Jesus' resurrection, they left the tombs, entered the holy city, and appeared to many. The captain of the guard and those with him, when they saw the earthquake and everything else that was happening, were scared to death. They said, this has to be the Son of God. There were also quite a few women watching from a distance, women who had followed Jesus from Galilee in order to serve them. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the Zebedee brothers. Late in the afternoon, a wealthy man from Arimathea, a disciple of Jesus, arrived. His name was Joseph. He went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate granted his request. Jesus took the body and wrapped it in clean linens, put it in his own tomb, a new tomb, only recently cut into the rock, and rolled a large stone across the entrance. Then he went off. But Mary Magdalene and the other Mary stayed, sitting in plain view of the tomb. After sundown, the high priest and Pharisees arranged a meeting with Pilate. They said, Sir, we just remembered that liar announced while he was still alive, after 3 days I will be raised. We've got to get that tomb sealed until the 3rd day. There's a good chance his disciples will come and steal the corpse and then go around saying, he's risen from the dead. Then we'll be worse off than before, the final deceit surpassing the first. Pilate told them, you will have a guard. Go ahead and secure it as best as you can. So they went out and secured the tomb, sealing the stone and posting guards. Luke 23. Then they all took Jesus to Pilate and began to bring up charges against him. They said, We found this man undermining our law and order, forbidding taxes to be paid to Caesar, setting himself up as Messiah King. Pilate asked him, "Is this true that you're the King of Jews?" "Those are your words, not mine," Jesus replied. Pilate told the high priest and the accompanying crowd, "I find nothing wrong here. He seems harmless enough to me." But they were vehement. He's stirring up unrest among the people with his teaching, disturbing the peace everywhere, starting in Galilee and now all through Judea. He's a dangerous man, endangering the peace. When Pilate heard that, he asked, "So he's a Galilean?" Realizing that he properly came under Herod's jurisdiction, he passed the buck to Herod, who just happened to be in Jerusalem for a few days. Herod was delighted when Jesus showed up. He had wanted for a long time to see him. He'd heard so much about him. He hoped to see him do something spectacular. He peppered him with questions. Jesus didn't answer. Not one word. But the high priest and religion scholars were right there, saying their piece, strident and shrill in their accusations. Mightily offended, Herod turned on Jesus. His soldiers joined in, taunting and cheering. Then they dressed him up in an elaborate king costume, sent him back to Pilate. That day Herod and Pilate became thick as thieves. Always before, they had kept their distance. Then Pilate called in the high priests, rulers, and the others and said, "You've brought this man to me as a disturber of the peace. I examined him in front of all of you and found there was nothing to your charge. And neither did Herod, for he has sent him back here with a clean bill of health. It's clear that he's done nothing wrong, let alone anything deserving death. I'm going to warn him to watch his step and let him go." At that, the crowd went wild. "Kill him! Give us Barabbas!" Barabbas had been thrown in prison for starting a riot in the city and for murder. Pilate still wanted to let Jesus go and so spoke out again. But they kept shouting back, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" He tried a third time, but for what crime? "I've found nothing in him deserving death. I'm going to warn him to watch his step and let him go." But they kept out a shouting mob, demanding that he be crucified. And finally they shouted him down. Pilate caved in and gave them what they wanted. He released the man thrown in prison for rioting and murder, and gave them Jesus to do whatever they wanted. As they let him off, they made Simon, a man from Cyrene, who happened to be coming in from the countryside, carry the cross behind Jesus. A huge crowd of people followed along with women, weeping and carrying on. At one point, Jesus turned to the women and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't cry for me. Cry for yourselves and for your children. Time is coming when they'll say, 'Lucky the woman who never conceived. Lucky the wombs that never gave birth. Lucky the breasts that never gave milk.' Then they'll start calling to the mountains. 'Fall down on us,' calling to the hills. 'Cover us up.' If people do these things to a live green tree, can you imagine what they'll do with dead wood?" 2 others, both criminals, were taken along with him for execution. When they got to the place called Skull Hill, they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus prayed, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Dividing up his clothes, they threw dice for them. The people stood there staring at Jesus, and the ringleaders made faces, taunting. "He saved others. Let's see him save himself. The Messiah of God. Ha! The chosen one. Ha!" The soldiers also came up and poked fun at him, making a game of it. They toasted him with sour wine. "So you're King of the Jews. Save yourself." Printed over him was a sign, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals hanging alongside cursed him. "Some Messiah you are. Save yourself. Save us! But the other one made him shut up. Have you no fear of God? You're getting the same as him. We deserve this, but not him. He did nothing to deserve this. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you enter your kingdom. He said, don't worry, I will. Today you will join me in paradise. By now it was noon, the whole earth became dark. The darkness lasting 3 hours, a total blackout. The temple curtain split right down the middle. Jesus called loudly, Father, I place my life in your hands. Then he breathed his last. When the captain there saw what had happened, he honored God. This man was innocent, a good man and innocent. All who had come around as spectators to watch the show, when they saw what actually happened, were overcome with grief and headed home. Those who knew Jesus well, along with the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a respectful distance and kept vigil. There was a man by the name of Joseph, a member of the Jewish High Council, a man of good heart and good character. He had not gone along with the plans and actions of the council. His hometown was a Jewish village of Arimathea. He lived in in expectation of the kingdom of God. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Taking him down, he wrapped him in a linen shroud and placed him in a tomb chiseled into the rock. A tomb never yet used. It was the day before the Sabbath just about to begin. The women who had been companions of Jesus from Galilee followed along. They saw the tomb where Jesus' body was placed. Then they went back to prepare burial spices and perfumes. They rested quietly on the Sabbath as commanded. Mark 15. At dawn's first light, the high priest, with the religious leaders and scholars, arranged a conference with the entire Jewish council. After tying Jesus securely, they took him out and presented him to Pilate. Pilate asked him, Are you the king of the Jews? He answered, If you say so. The high priest let loose a barrage of accusations. Pilate again asked, Aren't you going to answer anything? That's quite a list of accusations. Still, he said nothing. Pilate was impressed, really impressed. It was a custom at the feast to release a prisoner, anyone the people asked for. There was one prisoner called Barabbas, locked up with the insurrectionists who had committed murder during the uprising against Rome. As the crowd came up and began to present its petition for him to release a prisoner, Pilate anticipated them. Do you want me to release the King of Jews to you? Pilate knew by this time that it was through sheer spite that the high priest had turned Jesus over to him. But the high priest by then had worked up the crowd to ask for the release of Barabbas. Pilate came back. So what do I do with this man you call King of the Jews? They yelled, Nail him to a cross. Pilate objected, but for what crime? But they yelled all the louder, Nail him to a cross. Pilate gave the crowd what it wanted. Set Barabbas free and turned Jesus over for whipping and crucifixion. The soldiers took Jesus into the palace called Praetorium and called together the entire brigade. They dressed him up in purple and put a crown plaited from a thorn bush on his head. Then they began their mockery. Bravo, King of the Jews. They banged on his head with a club, spit on him, and knelt down in mock worship. After they had had their fun, they took off the purple cape and put his own clothes back on him. Then they marched out to nail him to the cross. There was a man walking by coming from work, Simon from Cyrene. The father of Alexander and Rufus. They made him carry Jesus' cross. The soldiers brought Jesus to Golgotha, meaning Skull Hill. They offered him a mild painkiller, wine mixed with myrrh, but he wouldn't take it, and they nailed him to the cross. They divided up his clothes and threw dice to see who would get them. They nailed him up at 9 o'clock in the morning. The charge against him, the King of Jews, was printed on a poster. Along with him, they crucified 2 criminals, one to his right and the other to his left. People passing along the road cheered, shaking their heads in mock lament. You bragged that you could tear down the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. So show us your stuff. Save yourself. If you're really God's son, come down from the cross. The high priest, along with the religion scholars, were right there mixing it up with the rest of them, having a great time poking fun at him. He saved others, but he can't save himself. Messiah, is he? King of Israel? Then let him come down from the cross. We'll all become believers then. Even the men crucified alongside him joined in the mockery. At noon, the sky became extremely dark. The darkness lasted 3 hours. At 3 o'clock, Jesus groaned out of the depths, crying out loudly, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you abandoned me? See, it slipped right into that old version. My God, why have you abandoned me? Some of the bystanders who heard him said, Listen, he's calling for Elijah. Someone ran off, soaked a sponge in sour wine, put it on a stick and gave it to him to drink, saying, Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down. But Jesus, with a loud cry, gave his last breath. At that moment, the temple curtain ripped right down the middle. When the Roman captain, standing guard right in front of him, saw that he had quit breathing, he said, This has to be the Son of God. There were women watching from a distance, among them Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of the younger James and Joseph and Shalom. When Jesus was in Galilee, these women followed and served him, and had come up with him to Jerusalem. Late in the afternoon, since it was the day of preparation, that is, Sabbath Eve, Joseph of Arimathea, a highly respected member of the Jewish council, came. He was one who lived expectantly on the lookout for the kingdom of God. Working up his courage, he went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate questioned whether he could be dead that soon, called for the captain to verify that he was really dead. Assured by the captain, he gave Joseph the corpse. Having already purchased a linen shroud, Joseph took him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud, placed him in a tomb that had been cut into rock, and rolled a great stone across the opening. Mary Magdalene and Mary, mother of Joseph, watched the burial. It says Joseph. And that is it for today's Bible reading. As always, get in touch with God today. I will see you again tomorrow. Bye.